The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of sand and rock under the blazing afternoon sun. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez wiped the sweat from his brow as he scanned the horizon through his binoculars. The convoy of 3 armored vehicles had been making good time along the dusty road that cut through the valley. But something felt wrong. Rodriguez had been leading SEAL operations for 8 years, and his instincts had kept him and his team alive through countless missions. Today, those same instincts were screaming danger. The radio crackled to life, breaking the tense silence. Alpha 1, this is Echo Base. We're showing some unusual movement in your sector. Stay alert, came the voice from headquarters. Copy that, Echo Base. We're keeping our eyes open, Rodriguez responded, his grip tightening on his rifle. The convoy consisted of 12 highly trained Navy SEALs, returning from a successful intelligence-gathering mission in the mountainous region. They had spent 3 days observing enemy positions and gathering crucial information about weapons caches hidden in the caves above. The mission had gone smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison sat in the second vehicle, constantly scanning the ridgeline above them. At 26, Morrison was one of the younger members of the team, but his sharp eyes and quick reflexes had saved the squad more than once. Something about the silence bothered him. In this part of the country, there should have been some signs of life. Birds, small animals, even insects. But there was nothing. Serge, you notice how quiet it is out here? Morrison spoke into his radio. Selv. Yeah, I've been thinking the same thing. Keep your weapon ready and watch those rocks up ahead, Rodriguez replied. The lead vehicle, driven by Petty Officer Second Class Tony Chen, began to slow as they approached a narrow section of the road. Here, the valley walls closed in on both sides, creating a natural choke point. Chen had driven convoy routes for 3 years and knew that places like this were perfect for ambushes. This doesn't feel right, Chen muttered to his passenger, Hospital Corpsman First Class David Kim. If I were setting up an ambush, this is exactly where I'd do it. Kim nodded, checking his medical supplies while keeping one hand on his sidearm. As the team's medic, he had seen too many good soldiers injured in surprise attacks. His job was to be ready for anything. The convoy continued forward, engines rumbling in the oppressive heat. The sun was beginning to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the rocky terrain. In the third vehicle, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Washington studied a detailed map of the area while coordinating with the base. Echo Base, Alpha 1. We're about 15 minutes from Checkpoint Bravo. Any updates on that movement you detected? Washington asked. Alpha 1, we lost visual contact about 10 minutes ago. Could have been nothing, but stay sharp. Weather's coming in, and we might lose communication soon. Washington looked up at the sky and noticed dark clouds building in the distance. A sandstorm was approaching, which would make visibility nearly impossible and cut off their radio contact with headquarters. They needed to get through this valley quickly. As they entered the narrowest part of the pass, Rodriguez felt his pulse quicken. The walls rose steeply on both sides, covered with loose rocks and boulders that could easily hide enemy fighters. The road here was barely wide enough for their vehicles, with a steep drop-off on the right side that fell into a rocky gorge. Suddenly, Chen's voice crackled over the radio with urgency. I've got movement up on the left ridge, about 200 meters ahead. Could be. His words were cut off by the sharp crack of rifle fire. The first round shattered the windshield of the lead vehicle, sending glass fragments flying. Chen instinctively swerved to avoid more incoming fire, but there was nowhere to go in the narrow pass. Contact left! Contact left! Rodriguez shouted into his radio as more gunfire erupted from the ridgeline above them. Muzzle flashes could be seen from multiple positions among the rocks. The convoy was trapped. Behind them, the road curved sharply around a bend, making retreat impossible under fire. Ahead, the pass continued for another half-mile before opening up again. They were sitting ducks in a carefully planned killing zone. Morrison jumped out of his vehicle and took cover behind the engine block as bullets pinged off the armored plating around him. He could see at least 6 enemy positions spread across the high ground above them. The attackers had chosen their spot perfectly. They could fire down on the convoy, while remaining mostly hidden behind the rocks. "We need to get to cover and return fire," Washington called out as he directed the team to defensive positions. But the rocky terrain offered little protection, and the enemy held the high ground advantage. Chen had managed to stop his damaged vehicle without going over the cliff, but smoke was beginning to pour from the engine compartment. Kim quickly checked him for injuries while staying low to avoid the continuing gunfire. "I'm okay, just some cuts from the glass," Chen said, wiping blood from his forehead. "But we're not going anywhere in this vehicle." The situation was rapidly deteriorating. The SEALs were highly trained and experienced, but they found themselves in one of the worst tactical situations possible. Trapped in a kill zone with limited cover and no easy escape route. The enemy fighters above had planned this ambush carefully, probably watching the convoy approach for miles. Rodriguez tried to establish contact with headquarters, but the approaching sandstorm was already interfering with radio communications. Static filled his earpiece as he attempted to call for air support or backup. "Echo Base, Alpha 1. We are taking heavy fire in the pass. Request immediate air support," he shouted into the radio, but received only broken transmissions in response. The gunfire from above continued in coordinated bursts, keeping the SEALs pinned down behind their vehicles. Morrison counted the enemy muzzle flashes and estimated they were facing at least a dozen well-positioned fighters. The attackers seemed to have plenty of ammunition and were in no hurry to finish the fight quickly. "They're trying to keep us here until dark," Washington observed grimly. "Once the sun goes down and that storm hits, we'll lose what little advantage we have." The team's situation grew more desperate by the minute. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped in terrain that heavily favored their attackers. The approaching sandstorm would soon cut off any hope of rescue, and their ammunition wouldn't last forever against such overwhelming odds. As bullets continued to rain down from the ridgeline above, the 12 Navy SEALs prepared for what could be their final battle. But none of them knew that somewhere in the rocky heights above the valley, a lone figure was already moving into position, about to change the course of the entire engagement. The wind began to pick up, carrying the first hints of sand and dust from the approaching storm. In a few hours, the desert would be consumed by a wall of swirling sand that would reduce visibility to just a few feet. The enemy fighters above seemed confident that they had all the time in the world to finish off the trapped convoy, but they were about to discover they had made a serious miscalculation. The gunfire had been continuous for 20 minutes, and ammunition was running low. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez watched grimly as his men made every shot count, but the enemy fighters on the high ground seemed to have unlimited rounds. The disabled lead vehicle was now fully engulfed in flames, the thick black smoke providing some concealment, but also giving away their exact position. "Surge, we've got movement on the right ridge too," Morrison called out, pointing to newly appeared muzzle flashes from the opposite side of the valley. "They're trying to surround us completely." Rodriguez felt his stomach sink. The situation had just gone from bad to impossible. With enemy fighters on both sides of the narrow pass, the convoy was caught in a devastating crossfire. The SEALs were now taking fire from 3 directions, with only the road behind them offering any hope of escape. Chief Petty Officer Washington crawled over to Rodriguez, keeping his head down as bullets whistled overhead. "Mike, we need to move now, or we're all going to die in this pass. That storm's almost on top of us." Looking up, Rodriguez could see the massive wall of sand approaching from the west. It stretched across the entire horizon like a brown tsunami, already beginning to block out the sun. They had maybe 30 minutes before visibility would drop to 0, trapping them completely. "Chen, can you get that third vehicle started?" Rodriguez shouted. "Engines damaged but still running," Chen replied from behind the rear vehicle. "But we'd be sitting ducks trying to turn around in this narrow space." Hospital Corpsman Kim had been treating 2 wounded team members behind the middle vehicle. Petty Officer Rick Torres had taken shrapnel in his shoulder, and Petty Officer Sam Mitchell was bleeding from a head wound. Both men were still conscious and fighting, but they needed medical attention soon. "How are they, Doc?" Rodriguez asked. "They'll live if we get out of here in the next hour. But Torres is losing blood fast. Kim replied while applying pressure bandages. The enemy fire intensified as more fighters joined the attack from concealed positions. Rodriguez counted at least 20 different firing points now, spread across the ridgelines like deadly flowers blooming from the rocks. Whoever had planned this ambush knew exactly what they were doing. Morrison had found a partially protected position behind a large boulder and was systematically picking off targets with his rifle. His accurate shooting had already silenced 3 enemy positions, but for every fighter he eliminated, 2 more seemed to take their place. "This isn't random," Morrison called out during a brief pause in the firefight. "They knew we were coming this way. Someone fed them intelligence about our route." The thought chilled Rodriguez. If Morrison was right, then this entire mission might have been compromised from the beginning. But there was no time to worry about intelligence leaks now. They had to focus on survival. Suddenly, a new sound reached their ears over the gunfire. The distant rumble of vehicles approaching from behind them. Rodriguez spun around, hoping to see friendly reinforcements. But his heart sank as he spotted 3 pickup trucks racing down the road toward their position. "Contact rear! We've got vehicles approaching from behind," he shouted. Through his binoculars, Washington could see armed fighters in the truck beds, their weapons pointed toward the trapped convoy. "They're trying to close the box completely. We'll have nowhere to run." The situation had become hopeless. The 12 SEALs were now surrounded by at least 30 enemy fighters, trapped in a narrow valley with a sandstorm approaching and no hope of rescue. Their radio was still blocked by atmospheric interference from the storm, cutting them off from any support. "Everyone check your ammo," Rodriguez ordered. "We need to make every round count." The responses were not encouraging. Most of the team was down to their last magazine, and the machine gun position that Morrison had set up was almost out of belt ammunition. They might have enough firepower for 10 more minutes of sustained combat, but not much longer. As the enemy vehicles drew closer from behind, preparing to complete the encirclement, something strange happened. The lead pickup truck suddenly swerved violently to one side, its driver slumping over the wheel. A split second later, the sharp crack of a high-powered rifle echoed across the valley. "What the hell?" Washington muttered, scanning the ridgelines for the source of the shot. The second pickup truck stopped abruptly as its windshield exploded in a shower of glass. The driver and passenger both collapsed, clearly hit by precision sniper fire. The remaining fighters in the truck beds jumped out and took cover behind their vehicles, looking around frantically for the hidden shooter. "Someone else is in this fight," Rodriguez said, hardly daring to believe it. "But who?" The answer came in the form of more precise rifle shots, each one finding its target among the enemy fighters on the ridgelines. Whoever was shooting possessed extraordinary skill, hitting targets at ranges that would challenge even the best military snipers. The enemy fighters who had been confidently pouring fire down on the convoy just minutes earlier were now scrambling for better cover. Morrison, who had been watching through his scope, suddenly pointed toward a rocky outcrop about 800 meters away on the left ridge. "There!" I saw a muzzle flash from that position, following Morrison's direction. Rodriguez focused his binoculars on the distant rocks. For just a moment, he caught a glimpse of movement. A figure dressed in desert camouflage, nearly invisible against the stone backdrop. The shooter was positioned perfectly to have clear lines of sight across the entire valley. "Whoever that is, they're saving our lives," Chen observed, as another enemy fighter fell to the unknown sniper's accurate fire. The mysterious shooter continued to pick off targets with mechanical precision. Each shot was carefully aimed and devastatingly effective. Within 5 minutes, the overwhelming enemy fire had been reduced to scattered, nervous bursts as the surviving fighters sought better cover. But the approaching sandstorm was now less than 15 minutes away, and the wall of dust and debris was beginning to affect visibility. The unknown sniper would soon lose the clear sight lines that made the long-range shots possible. "We need to move while we still can," Rodriguez decided. "Chen, get that vehicle ready. We're making a run for it." As the team prepared to abandon their positions and make a desperate dash through the valley, they had no idea that their mysterious savior was already moving to a new position. High above them, invisible among the rocks and shadows, a lone figure in combat gear was repositioning with fluid, practiced movements. The figure carried an M4 carbine equipped with a high-powered scope and moved with the silent efficiency of someone trained in the deadliest skills of warfare. But perhaps most surprising of all, beneath the desert camouflage and tactical gear, the mysterious sniper, who was single-handedly turning the tide of the battle, was a woman. She had been tracking the enemy fighters for 2 days, waiting for exactly this opportunity. Now, as the sandstorm approached and the trapped SEALs prepared to make their final desperate move, she was ready to complete her mission and reveal herself to the men whose lives she was about to save. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since the ambush began, the 12 Navy SEALs had reason to hope they might survive the deadly trap that had been set for them in the narrow desert pass. Captain Sarah Mitchell had been tracking this terrorist cell for 3 months. As a Marine Corps sniper with 4 combat deployments and over 200 confirmed kills, she was one of the most lethal marksmen in the U.S. military. But today, she wasn't operating under official orders. Her younger brother Danny had been killed in an ambush by this same group 6 months ago. His convoy had been hit in a nearly identical setup, trapped in a narrow valley, overwhelmed by superior numbers, and left to die. No one had come to help Danny and his team. Today, Sarah was making sure that wouldn't happen to another group of American soldiers. She had been following the terrorist cell through the desert for weeks, learning their patterns and waiting for the right moment. When she intercepted radio chatter about an ambush planned for the narrow pass, she knew this was her chance not only for justice, but to save lives. From her concealed position among the rocks, Sarah had a clear view of the entire battlefield. Through her scope, she could see the trapped SEALs below, their situation growing more desperate by the minute. The approaching sandstorm would be here within 10 minutes, and after that, visibility would drop to 0. "Time to finish this," she whispered, adjusting her rifle's scope for a long-distance shot. Her next target was the enemy commander, identifiable by his position and the way other fighters deferred to him. He was hiding behind a large boulder about 600 meters away, occasionally exposing himself to direct his men's fire. Sarah waited patiently, controlling her breathing, until he made the mistake of stepping into the open. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, and a split second later, the enemy commander spun and fell. His death caused immediate confusion among the remaining fighters, who began firing wildly in all directions, trying to locate the sniper who was decimating their ranks. Down in the valley, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was coordinating his team's escape attempt. The mysterious sniper had eliminated nearly half of the enemy forces, but they still faced overwhelming odds and the approaching storm. "Everyone into the third vehicle. We're moving in 30 seconds, he ordered. Hospital Corpsman Kim helped the wounded Torres and Mitchell toward the remaining functional vehicle, while the rest of the team provided covering fire. The enemy fighters were still shooting, but their fire was much less coordinated now without their commander. As the SEALs prepared to move, Sarah shifted to another position, using the rocky terrain to stay hidden while maintaining her field of fire. She had saved 3 magazines of ammunition for exactly this moment, the final push that would get the convoy clear of the kill zone. The enemy fighters who had been approaching from behind in the pickup trucks were now taking cover behind their vehicles, afraid to advance after seeing their comrades picked off by the precision rifle fire. But there were still enough of them to stop the convoy if they coordinated their attack. Sarah solved this problem by putting precise shots through the fuel tanks of all 3 trucks. The vehicles erupted in flames, forcing the fighters to abandon their positions and retreat to a safer distance. The road behind the convoy was now clear. "Go! Go! Go!" Rodriguez shouted, as the 12 SEALs piled into the single remaining vehicle. Chief Petty Officer Washington took the wheel while Chen squeezed into the passenger seat, his wounded shoulder wrapped in bandages. The rest of the team packed into the cargo area, their weapons ready to return fire if necessary. The overloaded vehicle groaned under the weight but started moving toward the narrow exit of the valley. As they drove, the remaining enemy fighters on the ridgelines tried to concentrate their fire on the escaping truck, but Sarah continued to pick them off one by one. Her shots came with mechanical precision. One enemy fighter after another fell as she systematically eliminated anyone who posed a threat to the convoy. Each pull of the trigger was deliberate and final, the result of years of training and months of careful planning. When an RPG team tried to set up a rocket launcher to stop the convoy, Sarah's bullet found the gunner before he could fire. When a machine gun team attempted to establish a blocking position, she eliminated the entire crew in less than 10 seconds. The convoy was almost clear of the kill zone when disaster struck. A lucky shot from the ridgeline punctured the rear tire, causing the vehicle to swerve violently. Washington fought to maintain control as the truck began to slow, but they were still 200 meters from the safety of the open valley beyond. "Tires blown," Washington called out. "We're losing speed." Sarah saw the convoy's predicament through her scope. The damaged vehicle wouldn't make it to safety before the remaining enemy fighters closed in. She had to act fast. Standing up from her concealed position, Sarah exposed herself completely as she began walking down the rocky slope toward the valley floor. Her M4 rifle barked repeatedly as she advanced, each shot dropping an enemy fighter who tried to target the damaged convoy. This was the moment the SEALs first saw their mysterious savior clearly. Through the dust and smoke, they could make out a lone figure in desert camouflage, moving with deadly purpose down the hillside, while firing with impossible accuracy. "Holy hell," Morrison breathed, watching through the rear window. "That's a woman." Sarah reached the valley floor just as the convoy limped to a stop, the blown tire making further progress impossible. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the vehicle while continuing to engage enemy targets. Her rifle was almost empty, but she switched to her sidearm without missing a beat. "U.S. Marines," she shouted as she reached the truck. "I'm here to get you out." Rodriguez stared at her in amazement. She was young, maybe 28, with dark hair tied back under her helmet and intense green eyes. Her gear was professional grade, and she moved with the confidence of an elite warrior. "Who are you?" he asked. "Captain Sarah Mitchell, Marine Corps." "We can talk later. Right now we need to move. That storm hits in 5 minutes." The first gusts of wind and sand were already beginning to swirl around them as Sarah quickly assessed the convoy's situation. The vehicle was disabled. They were still in the kill zone, and enemy fighters were beginning to regroup on the ridgelines above. "There's a maintenance road about half a kilometer ahead," Sarah said, pointing through the swirling dust. "It leads to an old mining camp, where I've hidden my vehicle. We can all fit if we move fast." "On foot?" Washington asked, looking at the wounded men. "It's our only option. The storm will give us cover. But we have to move now." Without waiting for further discussion, Sarah began helping the wounded Torres and Mitchell out of the truck. Kim grabbed his medical supplies, while the rest of the team gathered essential equipment and ammunition. As they started moving through the increasing wind and sand, Sarah took point, using her intimate knowledge of the terrain to guide them through the rocky landscape. The approaching sandstorm was becoming a blessing rather than a curse. The reduced visibility would hide them from any remaining enemy fighters. The group moved in single file, with Sarah leading and Rodriguez bringing up the rear. The wind howled around them, and the air filled with stinging sand that made breathing difficult. But they were alive, and they were moving toward safety. 20 minutes later, through the swirling brown chaos of the full sandstorm, they reached the old mining camp. Hidden behind a collapsed building was Sarah's modified military Humvee, equipped with navigation equipment and emergency supplies. As the 12 SEALs crowded into and onto the vehicle, Rodriguez finally had a chance to ask the question that had been burning in his mind. "Captain Mitchell, why were you out there? And how did you know we needed help?" Sarah was quiet for a moment as she started the engine and began navigating through the storm using GPS. Finally, she spoke. "My brother Danny was killed by the same terrorist cell 6 months ago. Different valley. Same tactics. I've been hunting them ever since." She paused, her hands gripping the steering wheel. "I couldn't save Danny, but I could save you." The convoy drove in respectful silence through the sandstorm, each man understanding the personal cost of their rescue. Sarah had risked everything to stop the people who had killed her brother, and in doing so, she had saved 12 lives. 3 hours later, they reached the forward operating base where the SEALs were stationed. As the sandstorm finally began to clear, Sarah's radio crackled to life with communications from her Marine unit, who had been searching for her. "This is Captain Mitchell. I'm at Fob Delta with 12 Navy SEALs who were ambushed in Sector 7. The terrorist cell has been neutralized, and all personnel are accounted for. As medical personnel rushed to treat the wounded, and intelligence officers began debriefing the team about the ambush, Rodriguez approached Sarah one last time. "Captain, I don't know how to thank you for what you did out there." Sarah looked at him with those intense green eyes, and for the first time since he'd met her, she smiled slightly. "Just make sure those intelligence reports reach the right people. The war isn't over yet, and there are more convoys out there that might need help." She walked away toward the Marine compound, her mission complete but her duty continuing. The 12 Navy SEALs watched her go, knowing they owed their lives to a warrior who had turned personal tragedy into the strength to save others. The convoy that had been trapped in the deadly valley had made it home, thanks to a female Marine sniper who had emerged from the shadows when they needed her most.